what is your ideal society if you do not want caste is a question that is bound to be asked of you. If you ask me, my ideal would be a society based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. And why not? These words by B.R. Ambedkar will resonate with everyone and anyone watching this lecture today as I recall some of the most powerful and emphatic lines by the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was also a politician, a journalist, a statesman, a trained economist, a social worker, a lawyer, historian, sociologist, and above all, a great humanitarian. I welcome you all to Hansraj e-Samvaad. My name is Piyush Chaudhary. I am working as an assistant professor at the Department of English at Hansraj College. Today, I'll be discussing chapter 6 of the book Individual and Society, which is an excerpt, an essay from the preface of Who Were the Shudras, published in 1946 by B.R. Ambedkar. I welcome you all to this lecture series. Now, coming to this essay, firstly, we have to understand that Ambedkar had been at the forefront of the ethical battle against caste inequalities in India, and he surely has left an indelible imprint on Indian polity, governance, and human rights. In our paper, Individual and Society, under the unit Caste, we need to understand that without reference to Ambedkar, all attempts to read and understand caste will prove absolutely futile. This is because of the huge role in creating this space for the untouchables, the former untouchables, where they can live with dignity today in the 21st century. So this is the sixth chapter in this unit Caste, and the short passage here in your syllabus is taken from the preface to Who Were the Shudras, which was a book published by B.R. Ambedkar in 1946. The readers will notice that the tone and the subject matter of this passage is very similar to chapter 1 of your syllabus by Jyotirao Phule, Caste Laws by Jyotirao Phule from Gulamgiri, right? If you remember, I've already taken a lecture on that particular topic, right? It will be added in the playlist. And what Phule was saying in chapter 1 and what Ambedkar is saying in chapter 6 is essentially very similar, right? So if I try to summarize in this particular chapter, B.R. Ambedkar's main target, his main target, if I try to summarize in one line, is at the sacred books and books like the Manusmriti, which legitimize caste-based discriminations and hierarchy in the culture and in the Indian society, right? And therefore, what Ambedkar does is he finally goes on to demolish the legitimacy of the sacred texts and the sacred books. So according to him, these books helped perpetuating and legitimizing the caste-based discriminations, and hence they must be destroyed and must be exposed completely. So this entire passage of your syllabus is basically taken from a preface to his bigger book, as I mentioned, Who Were the Shudras. So he begins the passage by explaining that he has been getting life threats, due to his views on caste, because he wants to abolish caste and he's facing widespread criticism from orthodox Brahmins, of the society. He says that he has received letters which were full of abuses, invective, and people are, threatening to kill him, so in the very beginning, he offers a very sharp critique and a very sharp criticism of the sacred books which legitimize untouchability, such as the Manusmritis. So look at these lines as you can see on the screen now. What goes by the name of sacred books contain fabrications which are political in their motive, partisan in their composition, and fraudulent in their purpose. So therefore, the main target of Ambedkar is the books, which were often cited since thousands of years to perpetuate caste-based inequalities. More so in the mid-20th century, when Ambedkar was living during the time of the India's independence, these books were held by religiously orthodox people as the upholders of, or as the upholder of caste-based inequalities. And due to these books, caste was getting justified. But after the independence, obviously, with the abolition of untouchability, things became better, right? But nothing should be justified, which is against the basic needs of human nature, and which is against the basic freedom of humans, right? So caste-based untouchability and the discrimination goes against the basic freedom of life, and therefore it is criminalized today, thankfully. Now look at the strong lines, as I go forward ahead, look at the strong lines that Ambedkar is using for people who defend caste, right? And by the way, please remember that his main target is not the upper castes, but rather those people from the upper castes who believe in caste-based discrimination, right? I'll prove this point as we go forward. But before that, look at these lines. And he says, they are more selfish than any other beings in the world. They are prostituting their intelligence to support the vested interests of their class. Right? So one can easily sense, a tone of bitter indignation in these works by B.R. Ambedkar. But as we have already discussed, and as Ambedkar also shows in the following lines, his main target are those people who believe in the legitimacy of caste. So here he is targeting the defenders of the caste system who believe that upper castes are superior to the lower castes. And how will I prove this? I'll prove this with just the next lines where he writes. He says, if the Hindus of this generation do not take notice of what I have to say, I am sure the future generation will. I do not despair of success. The only class of Hindus who are likely to welcome the book are those who believe in the necessity and urgency of social reform. I am glad to know that such a class of Hindus exist. Small though they may be, they are my mainstay, and it is to them that I have addressed my argument. Right, on page 55 of the book. So the point, this particular point, the one that I just now read, is important because whatever Ambedkar said has more or less been, it has been realized today. This also proves the fact that Ambedkar, as a sociologist, as a historian, as an economist, knew that things will change someday or the other. Thankfully today, things have changed. So this is the extreme relevance of this chapter in the book and in your syllabus. This is because Ambedkar knew that change would come in a few generations, and definitely change has come. Right? At the same time, let me give a disclaimer that I am in no way trying to justify caste, or I am in no way trying to say that today caste-based discriminations do not occur. Right? I am not making this wrong claim. Right? As I have already discussed in the previous chapter today, earlier also, that even today caste exists, and it is still very difficult to eradicate unless we bring about a complete social change. Right? So caste is present today, but the amount of discrimination, the amount of atrocities, the open atrocities that the people who were born as untouchables felt is reduced to a great extent today, all thanks due to the efforts of the author whose texts we are reading in this particular lecture, and that is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar himself. Right? Then further he goes on to explain how the sacred literature such as the Manusmriti, and he mentions that, was actually a creation of the people who wanted to justify caste. Right? Ambedkar says that their main objective was to sustain the superiority and privileges of the Brahmins as against the non-Brahmins. Right? And this is why we should reject such a piece of literature. Then further on, he also goes on to explain why there are certain scholars who defend caste. This is because the upper caste get certain benefits, certain privileges by defending the caste. Right? Because it gives them the legitimacy and the power over the lower castes. Hence, Ambedkar is essentially trying to say that caste is political in nature. Finally, in one line, he explains the purpose of his writing this particular book. So if you look at these lines, he says, it contains an exposure of the real character of the conspiracy against the Shudras, which no Brahmin scholar could have had the courage to present. Now, taking forward from this quote that I just now showed to you on the screen, that I just now read, Ambedkar goes on to explain how a Brahmin and a non-Brahmin scholar of history and sociology, how they write. And he also goes on to explain the features and virtues of a good historian. Look at these lines that he says, that Ambedkar talks about what makes a good historian. He says, as has been said, a historian ought to be exact, sincere and impartial, free from passion, unbiased by interest, fear, resentment or affection, and faithful to the faith, to the truth, which is the mother of the history, the preserver of great actions, the enemy of oblivion, the witness of the past, the director of the future. In short, he must have an open mind, though it may be an empty mind, and readiness to examine all evidence, even though it be spurious. So Ambedkar shows himself as a true and as an impartial historian. He says that the book is being written with only one motive, and that is to present history in the most impartial manner possible. And he says that he has just one aim to write this book, and that is to show history, which is true and impartial. And that's exactly what Ambedkar has done. Right? Now, coming towards the end of this passage, Ambedkar says that this book will not be artistically appealing, and this book is written for the Shudras who do not know how they were marginalized and what led to their marginalization in society. Let me read some of the last quotes of the book. He says, but the book is written for the ignorant and the uninformed Shudra. who do not know how they came to be what they are. They do not care how artistically the theme is handled. Right? So, in a very objective and a plain manner, Ambedkar writes this preface without making it sound artistically appealing. This also makes us remember, if you remember in the initial lectures on Hira Bansode, the first lecture, I also talked about how Dalit literature is unlike the high class elite literature, and it does not focus on aesthetics the way the high class literature does, right? Regular literature does, because this literature is not for entertainment. Dalit literature is about social change, and therefore, when the topic is about social change, then the tone of literature will not be artistically appealing. It's as simple as that. As per the aesthetic categories that we often associate literature with, so this particular book will also be written in a similar manner by Ambedkar. This particular book, who were the Shudras, right? This contains an exposure. It contained an exposure of the real character of the conspiracy against the Shudras. Right? So finally, this chapter ends on a note to educate the lower classes. This is once again one more similarity, if you remember, with chapter 1 that we read by Jyotirao Phule. So a question can come in the exam to compare and contrast chapter 1 and chapter 6 and how both these chapters are different or perhaps similar to each other. Chapter 1 and chapter 6 are similar. They are of course different, but a lot of the subject matter that Phule raises and Ambedkar raises are more or less very similar. So Ambedkar is a very sane voice, but Ambedkar is not taking revenge. No, he was not taking revenge at all. So the thing is that he wanted an equitable society based on equality, fraternity and justice. As the opening of this lecture, I discussed this, that what is the ideal society, that which is based on equality, fraternity and justice and liberty, right? So Ambedkar takes a textual analysis and he reads the text, that is the Manusmritis and other religious texts, and holds the text responsible for the degradation of the lower class, right? So abolition of untouchability requires social reform and political reform both. In his undelivered speech, Annihilation of Caste, Ambedkar talked about the importance of both these reforms, right? So Ambedkar definitely gave us the political reform, which was so strong that it ultimately led to social reform today. And that is why today things are much better than they were at the time of India's independence with respect to discriminations against caste. So these in short were some of the major points, and these were some of the major discussions of this chapter by B.R. Ambedkar. So that is it for the lecture. I thank you all for being with me in this lecture, and I sincerely hope that Ambedkar's views resonate with yours, and I hope the students, the viewers, will get some good food for thought by reading this chapter by Ambedkar. On this note, I will end the lecture and I will see you very soon shortly. Thank you so much for your attention and for your patience. Goodbye. Jai Hind.